Hello, I'm going to have a coffee with you. I'm not trying to imitate Scott Adams. It just seems the natural thing to do. Or maybe I am, and I just don't know. Anyway, this is the next step in the method. Method consists says on the screen here. It says vocabulary, phrases, stories, grammars, and arguments. This is the first part after the introduction, and this covers operational terms. How do we create an operational vocabulary? And this is the outline of the course, I guess I'm giving online here, and you can see in red vocabularies listed. So that's where we are in part one. We're just beginning. So in order to start, we have to start with the foundations. Before we get to terms, we have to say, well, what's the content of terms, or what's the content of vocabulary? So this is where we're going to talk about the foundations, the three terms: dimensions, constant relations, and first causes. So what's a dimension? We talk about its three-dimensional space, and we hear the term space has three dimensions and a fourth time dimension, so 3 + 1 dimensions. This is, space doesn't have dimensions. Instead, we require 3 spatial and 1 time dimension of measurement in order to describe it. We can also use 2 radial dimensions and 1 length dimension to describe it. Now, that means that there's a circle this way and a circle this way, and then an arrow, which gives us an arrow. So it's what degrees here, what degrees there, and the length. And that can too, but that produces a relative positioning. So we don't have an origin point. Our origin point is not Cartesian in that sense. It's completely relative. So it's how vectors are structured. So again, when a mathematician or physicist refers to four dimensions, or they're talking about it takes 4 dimensions to measure space-time, he's referring to the number of measurements it takes. So when the same thing happens when somebody says, well, it hits 11 dimensions of whatever, well, it takes 11 dimensions of measurement. The 11 dimensions of measurement may be necessary, or it may be an artifact, but in general takes some number of dimensions to measure something. If it requires a ruler, it just requires 1, and if it requires space-time, it requires 3 + 1, and so on. So some things get very complicated. This is one of the problems with physics, is that they talk about the math as if the math is what they're measuring, but they're measuring something they don't understand with math, so they describe it in math. So what is a dimension? It's a measurement for a range of possible, continuous, whether analog, or digital discrete values. Some examples would be the spectrum of colors, the frequency of tones, a range of tastes, the 4 space-time dimensions, and of course the difference between a count, a distance, an area, and a volume. So we have a line, a graph. A graph is, you have a line, right? A hierarchy, like a tree, and a graph is like a map where you're trying to get to cities. I always think that's a little confusing, but because it's just a map. A supply-demand curve. A lot of what we do is try to get you to think in supply-demand curves. But most importantly, what are I just listed visible colors, frequency of tones, range of tastes, 4 space-time dimensions. And I did that on purpose because those are dimensions that we can humanly experience. So in order to understand how to make man into a system of measurement, in other words, how to create a system of measurement with ourselves, what are the dimensions of human experience? So, in other words, we have to talk about what the dimensions of human experience are. I'm going to get to that in a bit. The second concept after dimension is, what's a constant relation? So it's one or more properties that is constant across a spectrum or series. So in example, simple example, we're doing a visible light. We can choose the 4 primary colors and then their intermediate colors. So we can take the red, yellow, blue, violet, or we can take red, yellow, blue, or we can take red, yellow, blue, violet, or we can take red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And we can go into even more detail if we want to. Although realize that like 3 points describe a line, that once you have 2 points, you have a line. 3 points sort of test a line. The more points you have on that line, the more terms you have in a series, the more greater precision you can get out of the series and less ambiguity. If you're a guy and you say it's green and some woman says some color, some version of green, you're like, it's just green. They're using a more precise system of measurement. Now, we can keep this one-dimensional shorthand for what's a spectrum of about 1 million colors that are distinguishable by the human eye, or we can add all those colors in between for greater precision. We can sort of get down to red, yellow, blue, or red, green, blue. The eyes work by green, not yellow, and your monitors tend to work by green, not yellow. So there's reasons for that don't matter right now. So with, say, red, yellow, blue, we can describe any color as a mixture of red, yellow, or sometimes green and blue. That's 3 dimensions. So we can describe any color on the spectrum of colors, the dimension of colors, with 3 dimensions of cause. Then we can state luminosity with 1 more dimension. So that's the brightness. So if you say, well, there's 3 plus 1 time dimensions we describe time or space-time, and then we can break it down into measure its causal dimensions or its measurable dimensions, and then we can say the same thing with colors. The spectrum of colors. We can say here's the color Here's the color spectrum, and then we can say, well, we can break the color spectrum down to its causal dimensions, its first causes, which being red, yellow, blue. And then we can state the luminosity, which gives us 4. So we have 3 plus 1 dimensions of light, just as we have color, rather, just as we have 3 plus 1 dimensions of space-time. So with that, we can describe all the colors available to the human eye at extraordinary precision, or we can describe the colors as just, it's a crayon box, or we can use the primaries. So hopefully I got across that a dimension is a line of measurement, and a constant relation is whatever shared across that dimension, and some dimensions can be disambiguated into first causal dimensions. So what's a first cause? What we're trying to find is the first causes of any reference we're referring to. So when we refer a term, we're trying to enumerate or discover the first causes of that term, and we're trying to do it by this method. And the silly thing is this methodology scales infinitely, so we're going to play with it quite a bit, starting at the bottom here with terms. So we want to define terms by their first causes. We want to define terms with first causes. We want to speak in sentences that were in first causes, and we want to tell stories in first causes, which is first cause or first principle thinking. So we have, like I said, the color spectrum. We have entropy in physics, time in economics, acquisition and cooperation. We have methods of influence, and we have the ways of cooperation or conflict. So we can discover this first cause across pretty much everything, and that's what we're sort of setting out to do with the method, is produce a system of measurement that's a vocabulary, grammar, and logic of first causes. So I call this Vitruvianism. I don't know if you know the name of the Man in a Circle by Da Vinci. It's called Vitruvian Man. So man is the measure of all things to man, and we're trying to accomplish is to use the human faculties, whether they're physical, sensory, perceptual, memorable, associative, predictive, logical, wayfinding, grammatical, and linguistic, to produce a marginally indifferent system of measurement for communication. Or marginally indifferent means that your and my perception of physical phenomena, are those testable phenomena, not saying our values, and not saying our world model, but saying that we reduce it to the first principles. Our sense perception is marginally indifferent for most things. Obviously, there are women who can see colors that don't exist because they have extra color sensitivity in their eye. Some of us are red-green colorblind. We have a man now who can run, who doesn't build up lactic acid, and he can run marathon after marathon. We have. Anyway, I don't want to get into it. I have a whole list of those guys, which I think is fascinating. And if we could ever combine them together, we might overcome more of the limitations of our human body. But the point is, marginal indifference means that you and I can do what's called an intersubjective test, which is we can both test something and come to agreement that it's marginally indifferent. In other words, it's sufficiently unambiguous for what it is we're trying to accomplish. You heard that? Sufficiently ambiguous? That's a statement of supply and demand. So, did I say this? Yes. So we're trying to do that because we want to make it difficult or impossible for people to engage in, transmit, or to create, or distribute, or amplify ignorance, error, bias, deceit, fraud, war, and yes, war. So let's talk about, now that we understand that terms have dimensions and that they're tied back to the human sense perception system, our bodies as a system of measurement, let's talk about the dimensions of measurement in the English language. I think linguists know all this stuff pretty well, but it's unfortunate that we don't talk about this we don't learn this because it's quite fun, really. So if we look at our vocabulary and organize the terms, we end up with, we tell stories with sentences, phrases, and words. And, I'd like you to think in sense of a sequence of episodes, an episode or sentence, a location, a place, a space in that place, a location relative to others, a place within that location, a space within that place, a path, the objects within that space, a path around them, and the background, and then anything that changes. Because honestly, that's what your brain is doing all the time. And what's important here is that what we're talking about in language is an evolution. And I'm going to repeat this over and over again. One of my techniques is to repeat things from 10 different directions so that you eventually can intuit it rather than try to so hard to remember it. So I'd like you to, so that the human evolution, or actually all animal evolution, evolved from this wayfinding ability of the movement. So all our thinking is just an evolution of movement, just like you can think about not about running, and your body can rehearse that without actually running, or you can imagine doing something without actually doing it. You're just not releasing the action. And so when the brain works, of course, it calculates our actions in parallel with our ideas, so that when we come to a position, the action is ready. We tend to think of thinking as important, because that's the world we live in. But realistically, thinking and consciousness are an adjunct to movement, and they're secondary. So of course the idea comes after the idea is less important than the movement. Evolution needed us to have movement before we needed ideas. That's really quite fascinating, really, when you think about it. So again, we just went through a sequence of things that were decreasing scales. The sequence of episodes, or the story, the episode, the location, place, space, path, object, background, and then the changes in state. What's changing? You want to think of that as a balance sheet, right? A ledger entry, a journal entries, and a product. So in some degree, we're creating an accounting system for for speech. We're trying to make sure that communication balances. So within story, sentence, phrase, and word, we have words. Right? That's what topic we're talking about, and words consist of a number of dimensions. A name, which realistically everything in language is a name of something, which could be a noun, an adjective, or a code word. It could be an action, which is a name of an operation, action or state. Those are verbs and adverbs. The name of a relationship between things or link between things, and whether we agree with that or not. That's again just like an accounting system. We can use that as an accounting system, and that's just 4 dimensions. So there's names, actions, relations, and agreement. That's it. Now we start with those 4 dimensions. Now let's look at each one of those and get a little more depth about it. Nouns are kind of interesting. So again, words consist of names, actions, relations, agreements. There's also noise words and code words, but I'm just going to assume that we're going to roll that into nouns. And within each category of word, we find multiple dimensions. So within a noun, which can be proper, like a person, thing, place, idea, perception, or sense. It can be an emotion, which we value. It can be a common or compound, a pronoun or a clarifier, determiner or a measurement. That tells us that's what the properties of what categories can it refer to, and then the rest of it's pretty simple. There's state, which is its condition, which person, whether we're talking about the you and me, myself, you and I, etc., others. We can talk about the sex of the individual, I wrote this before the whole sex gender thing, so anyway, I should change this back to sex. So you have female, neutral, young male, male, and that's of course because in reality we do need to know the properties of the individual, so we know what responsibilities and interests they have. I've highlighted possession here because I want you to understand I want you to clue into how many things have to do with ownership. So you have possession of what it can own it, can be owned, and cannot be owned. Those things exist. And the number, which is some things are countable and some things are not. We say a bundle of this or a bunch of, and then we have countable things. So we have countable or unique, countable and uncountable. So that's pretty simple, right? Most I think all early counting systems of primitive people had 1, 2, and more, and our language has 3 states: unique, this one, countable, which is like there's X number of them, and then we describe things as abstract categories in themselves. And then our kind of perception, whether it's concrete using the observable 5 senses, whether it's a feeling, whether it's an idea, an abstract idea, or whether it's an experience that's perceivable or experienceable or imaginable. Now, notice that there aren't that many dimensions there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If we get to verb, we find a similar thing. Again, we have nouns for actions. We have names, actions, relations, agreements, and so on. And then with verbs, we have an action property, an action clarifier. And then we have a statement about its knowledge. It's unknown, we believe it, we know it, it's undeniable, it's tautological. We have a temporality where it's always been, has been, is currently, will be, and will always be. That's a probably important one. I'll bring that up a lot because notice there's only 5 dimensions there. There's only 5 states in the dimension of temporality. Again, I'm going to call out the red, with red here, the ownership issues, which is the ownership is undiscovered, unconvertible, converted, homesteaded, possessed, by consensual property, normal property, or property right, which is insured by a third party, or it's inalienable, what we call inalienable, but it's or natural property, which means it's your life and your imagination, your emotions. Permissibility, regardless of whether it's who owns it, whether we are in action with this thing is impermissible, permissible, or obligatory. Now, some rights are obligatory, and some obligations are obligatory, and some things are permissible and some are not. And then we have gain or loss. This is the measurement of a verb. It tells us whether we're gaining, it's a neutral transition, or a loss. And you say that so we can see how much of an accounting system this is what do we know about it, where was it or is it, who owns it, what can we do with it, and does it produce a gain or loss? We don't think of verbs as accounting, but that's what they do. We talk about whether doing this something or other is impossible or contingent, possible or necessary, and whether it's decidable, undecidable, preferable, good or true. So that's what a verb does. So a noun is a piece of inventory, and a verb is the accounting system that's accounting transaction that's placed upon it. Now, I'm not saying that man invented accounting this way. I'm saying that accounting is a natural progress of what humans already do in ordinary language. But we are super amazing at accounting for social and material and status, debt and credits. Means we're better at measuring that than all other things combined. And our language is extremely conscious of it. And we developed accounting because it's already in our mind. We evolved it. We just simply needed to scale what we did for bigger perception. So just like we needed more numbers to count more than 1, 2, and more, and we needed weights and measures. We needed accounting for very complex volumes of weights and measures. But accounting is just another language, another grammar. And then we have relations. So if you were going to do this in accounting terms, it would be what things are property of this bundle. If you online commerce, you buy a bundle of things that has stuff inside. Well, it's the same idea. And then we have agreements, yes or no. True, false, yes, no, good, bad, whatever. These are all versions of agreements. So notice again, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? So you notice temporality. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You notice there's 7 dimensions here. So there's a small number of dimensions in our vocabulary. You have 4 dimensions in words. You have 6 dimensions or 7 dimensions in nouns. You have 7 dimensions in verbs. You have 2 dimensions in relations, and we have 1 dimension in consent. That's 4 dimensions per phrase or sentence that constitute a transaction for meaning, and each of those 4 dimensions contains 4, 7, 2, 1 dimension for consent, with adjectives and adverbs providing additional dimensions of measurement if necessary. So within each category of word, within each word we find dimensions. With each category of word we find dimensions, and we can reduce these to measurements, as you can see here. What's interesting about this is you've probably heard that you can sort of visualize 5 things, but that's about it. In other words, when you start visualizing more than 5, some of us can do 6 or 7. What happens is that you have to break them into sets because you can't actually track it. Now, chimpanzees, they can do this all day long. We can't. I'll explain why that is maybe later. But we are limited. We traded prediction and time, which causes a continuous decay of memory for what's in chimpanzees is an extraordinary real-time ability to persist memory or visual memory. So there's a cost to all those extra neurons and all the hierarchy of neurons, because it's not like neurons go out this way. It's that they work in a line. So you're always increasing the abstraction as you move forward from the back of your head to the beginning. So obviously, as the stream continues, we're going to have a rate of decay. So you'd expect that to happen in any living being. So there are limited dimensions to describe whatever we're referring to. There's about as many noun dimensions in both nouns and verbs, 7. There are about 14 dimensions between the two of them. And the only complex relationships are state, perception, and relations. But in combination, these three things provide a huge set of sensory dimensions. So if you think about it as, well, 3 points test a line, but if you put a bunch of lines and they all intersect at the same point, then you have a really unambiguous set of descriptions. And really that's what we do with language. We disambiguate through increasing precision along a number of axes. So you move to the general to the particular. I start out talking, you start out with a sentence. The sentence is a process of continuous recursive disambiguation. In other words, it's a wayfinding, and you get more precision as you go along. Human grammars vary only in the order of how that's done, but certain languages put more demand on your memory to do that than others. But I mean, fundamentally, we train ourselves to do the same grammars. But these scales are limited. In other words, even though we can do this incredible precision through cross combination of different dimensions, we're always working with sort of 1 to 5, 1 to 3, 1 to 7 scales. And, you see this in all walks of life. For example, if you know anything about marketing or survey taking, is that, 1 to 10 scale, it doesn't mean, 1 to 10 is more than people can do. You find out that whether you agree with it or not, everything's like, it doesn't matter. It's either below 8, it's 8, 9, or 10. And so people tend to rate things that way, and it's sort of around 5. So when you say 1 to 3 is probably too small a scale, I agree, disagree, or I'm ambivalent, that you add the intermediate, just like you add intermediate colors in the color spectrum, you get 5. And 5 tends to be about the level of precision you need to ask a survey about anything. So 1 to 10 scales are always reducible to a 1 to 5 scale because humans' measurement is along those lines. If you start intersecting a whole lot of those measurements, which is what psychology testing or personality or moral testing does, you end up with convergence from a number of different axes on whatever it is you are trying to measure. I don't want to lose myself here. So what can we learn about measurements? I have the ... here because I could go on for an hour about this, and I'm trying to remember to make myself stop. What we can learn is state, perception, and relation function. There's a system of measurement. So when we're talking, we're using systems of measurement in a small number of dimensions, but sometimes in combination to narrow down a scene or an object or experience or a scene or an episode into a set of standard weights and measures. We don't think of the humans as senses as standard weights and measures, but they are, and that's why all things measurable to man are extensions of man, and that those weights are marginally indifferent. In other words, yes, I can lift, my friends can lift way more weight than I can, especially at my age, and some people can lift less weight than I can. But our understanding of the limits of human weightlifting is about the same. I mean, people can't lift so much, so that's marginal and different within certain levels. So if I call something heavy, I mean, it's going to require effort to move it, but we can now say, okay, well, but what's heavy for you and heavy for me? And we can talk about we can add precision to it, like, well, it's 30 pounds. Oh, so it's heavy that I don't want to, carry it all day long, but I mean, it's not too hard to pick up and move from here to there. The other thing, and this is, of course, the core we're trying to get to, is that by putting those red call-outs in there, so you'd notice ownership, permission, possibility, etc., is so that you would take notice of the fact that of the dimensions that we have, I'll go back to them for a second, see if I can get back there quickly. of the dimensions that we have, possession, ownership, permissibility, and gain or loss, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and consent 5. 5 of the limited 20 some odd measurements that we have are relate to ownership and permission. So the point here is that cooperation, the ability to cooperate, is extraordinarily influential in the construction of our language, so much so that it's almost the dominant feature of it. Description and along with description, the ownership is a significant part of what we do. And so and nearly, the number of, even so, the number of dimensions of negotiation. Let me see if I start this over again. Other than perception and relations, the number of dimensions is small, right? And nearly all can be categorized as necessities of negotiation, possession, and weights and measures. And within dimensions of possession, our language contains an extraordinary dedication to the dimensions of possession. Given the dimensions of above we've already talked about, let's also consider person, gender, and possession are dimensions of nouns, ownership and permissibility, gain or loss of our verbs, the degree to which are we warranted is implied or if not stated, and whether we agree or not or consent or not is stated. So most of our language, which you would expect, because language evolved for us to communicate and negotiate, because cooperation is so valuable, that most of our language evolved to assist us in not only communication but negotiation. So language evolved for cooperation. The same thing for consciousness. We make a big deal of consciousness, but if you've ever watched videos of sleepwalkers, they can do almost anything until they have to interact with a person. When you interact with a person, you have to simulate their mind. When you simulate their mind, then you have to be conscious. So that's where we evolved that from. Otherwise, if we didn't have to cooperate, consciousness doesn't provide. It wouldn't emerge as we understand it. It would emerge more as sleepwalking. So just as choices and decisions in your mind consist of conscious consent with intuition or not, that's why language, cooperation, and consciousness evolved together. So what can we learn from this? We can learn that the emphasis on possession, ownership, and property it's just necessary for cooperation and calculation, and they function as the basis of ethics and morality, and our valuation of changes in state of possessions or interests and the origin of our emotional responses. In other words, what's going to come very clear here is that all our emotions are responses to changes in state of assets. It's dehumanizing somehow, but it's evolutionarily obvious and it's evolutionarily necessary. We are, whether we like it or not, acquisition machines, and we're using language to negotiate on cooperation because of the far, far higher turns on cooperation, division of labor than are possible by individual action. Adam Smith is famous for this, but it's not like adding two people it produces a linear progression. No, it produces a logarithmic progression. You would get things way done faster, way done more efficiently, way more effectively, and more cheaply with more people. And the cost doesn't increase linearly. We're going to see that power law throughout all human cooperation, is that when you put a bunch of people to cooperate, not only does it make everything cheaper, but there's about a 20% gain with every doubling, 25% gain with every doubling that produces extraordinary returns. In other words, it's not possible for a human being, which were really expensive, to survive really long term without the pack. Of course, what we desire to acquire varies by individual over time. We're constantly in the process of acquiring something or other, even if it's just oxygen or time. And all human behavior can be expressed as gain, preservation of loss, of acquisitions. And to some degree, that's the accounting system we're building. We're trying to build a system of measurement that talks about gains and losses, testifiability and not, reciprocity and not, gains and losses and not. So that's the first section. You should have a sort of grasp of dimensions, constant relations, first causes, the influence of possession, cooperation, and negotiation in the dominance of our speech, and the fact that we're trying to produce a system of measurement that's intersubjectively testable, because we need it. We can't. A system of measurement's no good if we both can't make use of it. All right, so this has been about 35 minutes. That's the end of step 1 of terms. We'll be back in just a minute with the next section, which is walking through how to disambiguate terms into first causes. I'm Kurt Doolittle for the Proprietarian Institute. Thank you very, very much, and please continue with us.